Hi TCS viewers, it's Chris Nichols here again from the Camera Store TV, and today I want to talk to you guys about Samsung. Not only a camera that they've come out with, but also their history as a company. You know, Samsung is a big company, lots of money, lots of technology, and they wanted to come into the camera market, but you got to remember, we're not talking TVs where, you know, it's easy to replace your old one. We're not talking about washing machines where it's easy to replace your old one. We're talking about cameras where a lot of existing users are A, very loyal, and B, have existing gear already. So Samsung decided, well, let's rebrand Pentax SLRs and try to get into that market. The problem is, guys, if you're going to take over the market and dominate it, maybe copying Pentax cameras is not the way to do it, unfortunately. But I will give Samsung this. They were one of the early adopters into the mirrorless market. And of course, we know how big that is now. And they did a few things right. Beautiful menus, using APS-C size sensors, and making, for the most part, fairly attractive, fairly modern design cameras. But you know what? They were way too expensive. I always personally found image quality was not as good as the reviews were saying. And for that and many other reasons, they just did not get a good foothold in the market. And our customers did not switch over to Samsung mirrorless cameras easily. But you got to admit that their early entries and attempts in this market have been rather piss poor. But that brings us to the brand new Samsung NX1. Now this camera is turning a lot of heads. It's generating tons of conversation. So we're going to take this camera out today and see if it can really, you know, compete with the big boys and get Samsung back into the market. You have to remember that Jordan and I are entering this with a lot of skepticism because of Samsung's past and the cameras we've reviewed in the past. But one of the things you got to keep in mind, guys, this camera is brand new to us as well. We just got our hands on it. So just like you viewers at home, we are going to experience this camera for the first time. We're going to go out with this together and we're going to see if this camera can really make us change our minds. All right, now handling overall is a big change. This is definitely their largest camera, and you know, I wouldn't say it's heavy. It's about 250 grams lighter than most cameras like 70Ds, D7100s, but it still has a very chunky feel and a very chunky weight. Great comfortable grip. And the other thing too, the body construction, it is all metal and you feel it. You know how when you touch a Nikon or a Canon, you know it's made of magnesium, but you still kind of second guess if it's plastic or not? This thing feels like metal. It is cold to the touch. Even through my Heat 3 gloves, I can feel the temperature off of that metal here in the cold weather. Overall, the dials are chunky. I like the way they turn and they're very solid. All the buttons are easy to press and it's a very logical layout. I even really like these side doors. They're easy to open and close and they feel very, very secure. You know, Samsung, I feel, has definitely done a great job on the handling. Fantastic overall. Feels like a full SLR. All right, a lot of impressive things here. Now, first off, just as a side note, the close focusing ability of this brand new 16-50 is pretty sweet here. But also this viewfinder, it's a very large EVF, just over 1x magnification and beautifully rich. You got the Super AMOLED screen on the back as well. You know, it's kind of funny because Samsung have always advertised having amazing screens, and I'm gonna be honest with you, even up to the NX30, I was actually really disappointed in their screen quality. When I took the NX30 on my road trip, I found that a lot of the shots looked terrible on the screen, and it's only when I got them home that I was actually confident that they were decent in quality. And you need to be confident when you're shooting your camera. The new screen, very sharp, very clear, very bright, full rotation, seems secure to me, but this viewfinder, very nice to use, very sharp, and like no lag, instantaneous. So really, we're up to a very modern standard on these screens. Now, I am a big fan of touch screens, and I love this one actually. I mean, first off, everything's laid out, very nice and easy to see. Everything works great, even with these gloves. You know, we've got these little sensors on here. I can use it, works fantastic. But I also like that I always have backups with buttons too, so I never have to rely on it if I don't want to. Really gives us a lot of options. But other things I like here, we've got features like pulling down the menu here to bring up storage, battery levels, display brightness. I mean, you got to give it to Samsung. They can make a graphic interface better than anybody else. They're beautiful, they're easy to use. The other thing I really love here too is a small point, the sensor for the EVF. It's actually really well calibrated. I find if I go to touch the screen, I'm not accidentally shutting it off. That happens a lot of other cameras. As well, I've got to bring my eye up to a very positive level, then it kicks in, take my eye away, it works well, it's designed well. So far, the handling with these modern features is fantastic. All right, so harassing this poor duck over here, and I was shooting with the 16-50, but I'm not getting the range I need, so I switched over to the 85 1.4 and discovered something somewhat disconcerting about the NX1. The autofocusing on this camera when you've got good light on the 16-50 is very consistent point to point. It's quite fast, although I will say I do notice a little bit of hunting from time to time. But put on the 85 1.4, even though it's got the SSA supersonic actuator, and I'm getting very slow focus, a lot of hunting. We've also found in low light, the NX1's quality of focus drops dramatically. We do find that sometimes it'll just completely give up, be totally out of focus, say you're good, and let you shoot. So I hope that they rectify that and it gets better. Right now I'd say the NX1 compared to the competition, although autofocusing well in good situations, is at best inconsistent. So of course I'm realizing I'm not tall enough to get my shot, but then I also remember rotating screen seems nice and strong. Doesn't go on the side mount like a GH4, and so for video users that's going to be a bit of a letdown because it's nice to have that swing out screen. Still, overall it works well. Another thing that I'm finding with the handling here, I love the clicky button on the dial as a lock. It's the smartest idea ever, and they've incorporated it here. One thing though, we've got quick buttons on the top left here. I'm not super enthused about where they are on the camera. Honestly, I don't like it, so I haven't been using them. But again, that's okay because the touch interface makes it so easy to change this stuff. I can hit the function button here and change it, or I can use my eye function button on the lenses. So Samsung give you a plethora of options to change ISO, autofocus, continuous drive metering, white balance anyways. Okay, so using the 85 again here, and granted we have a tricky lighting situation, but this focusing, it's just so bad. Oh, look at it. There. Oh, I didn't even do it. Now, of course, with a professional body, we also need some professional glass. And today I'm using their brand new S-Series 16-50. It's an f2 to 2.8. I like that. Nice and bright. And we're getting the 24mm equivalent at the wide angle range. Fully sealed, very well built, and so far today, very sharp. It also focuses nice and quick. We've got a 70 to 200 equivalent out as well to round it out. And you got to remember that Samsung actually have a very decent line of lenses. There's some very high quality optics, some very fast primes out there. I know not a lot of people know about them, but if you do get into the system, you've got the glass to back it up. Now, of course, as we talked about, Samsung's a big company. They got tons of research and development, and that means lots of advanced technology. And of course, you're going to get it in here. Now, some of it's kind of gimmicky, like these auto sports modes and setup modes where, you know, you can do baseball and it'll try to take the photo for you. Honestly, I'd use the computer up here instead and get those shots better myself. We tried it, it doesn't work great. Now, one of the biggest technological advances on this camera is the new sensor. 28 megapixels makes it the highest res APS-C size sensor on the market. But on top of that, it's backside illuminated, and we've got copper interconnectors on the chip instead of aluminum. Now, this all promises much better low light performance. What I've seen from early testing is high ISO performance is better than most other cameras on the market. We're going to take a look at that in just a bit. One of the other changes here is connectivity. Now, Samsung is one of the first companies to release Wi-Fi on cameras and make it work well. We tested it on the early NX cameras that we played with, but now this has Bluetooth connectivity on the go. We've got a brand new Wi-Fi interface for maximum connection speed, and this basically means that you can have very easy connection to many different tablets, phones, and computers. We're actually going to put some of these photos right through Wi-Fi, through the app, onto our new Instagram account for you guys to look at. Now, the NX1's brand new processing engine does give us another big advantage, and that's 15 frames per second shooting. We were trying here with the birds, and you can see it does give us a lot of shots very, very quickly. Now, what else is great about that is you got to remember this is 50% faster than even high-end SLRs. Now, when it comes to the continuous autofocus, I do like it. It seems more consistent than the point-to-point. I'd say it does a good job of tracking mid-speed subjects. And again, very, very useful for video, very, very useful for stills. You will like this camera for shooting sports, action, and chickadees. All right, so I'm going to take pictures of Jordan's here. I'm going to use the touch autofocus to put it right on him. I'm going to just keep letting it shooting until it buffers out there. Yeah, it's doing good, yeah, and then it slows down. We got a nice 600 speed card in here. We're shooting at maximum JPEG quality, 28 megapixels, and I'm finding that I'm getting about 60 to 70 shots in a row, so 15 frames per second, excellent buffer. The continuous focus I saw slipped a little bit, but overall did a great job. All right, so that pretty much does it for the still side of it. And of course, I am fully capable of doing the video aspects of this camera too. But a very famous fellow YouTuber, Dave Dugdale, who we do respect and who I used to like, actually wants to see more of Jordan and less of Chris. So because Dave Dugdale wants it, here's Jordan.
Hey guys, it's Jordan to talk about the video and leave all that nature behind and get back into the city. So the NX1 excited a lot of people, primarily for its video functionality, and there's a big reason for that. This is the first camera using H.265 compression. Now, this is going to be the future for all kinds of web streaming, things on YouTube, Netflix, because it's unbelievably efficient. This is shooting at 40 megabits per second. Seems incredibly low, and it's doing 4K at that, but the quality is actually really good on it. So this camera is kind of a glimpse into the future. So Samsung doesn't have a huge background in professional video, but looking at the specs, we've got Cinema 4K, we've got Ultra HD at 30 frames per second, we've even got 120 frame per second 1080 right-in camera that plays back in slow motion. It's a really compelling feature set, and not what you'd expect for the first generation of their video lineup. So Samsung's got to have a pile of technology under the hood in this thing, because what it's doing is it's taking a 6.5K signal right off the sensor, it's downsampling at 4K in real time right within the body, which is just nuts. So resolution is not an issue with this camera. It's a very sharp picture. What isn't quite as nice is the dynamic range. They just use standard picture profiles for it, and you can turn down the contrast a bit on that, but there's no log profile or anything like that. So I'm sure we're not getting as much dynamic range in video as this sensor is capable, and that's, a bit of a bummer. So the experience of actually shooting video is pretty nice because we've got a gorgeous LCD screen on the back and a really nice EVF as well. It makes it really easy to check focus, check your color, your exposure. I did notice, however, there's a bit of a color shift going from the LCD to the EVF. Now, you can configure that, but I wish right out of the box it came a little more balanced between the two of those. So when I first grabbed the camera, I was a little thrown because there's no movie mode on the top dial. And Samsung does something kind of weird here. You have an option called Movie Standby that you can program onto any of your custom buttons. And what that's going to do is let you preview your 16:9 exposure. Your audio levels will pop up. That's quite nice. But it also takes some stuff away when you push that. I really like that when I'm manually focusing, the camera automatically punches in, but it also gives me a distance scale that I find really useful. And as soon as I hit the movie standby mode, that disappears. And I would really like to have the option of the distance scale when I'm actually recording. Would be fantastic. It seems like it's just a firmware thing, but this is production firmware and it's not doing it. So I'm a little annoyed by that. So one thing you guys have probably gathered from watching Camera Store TV is I love shooting video with mirrorless cameras. They're small, the quality's fantastic, but one thing that drives me crazy about them is the focus-by-wire focus systems that almost every mirrorless lens is using, and it's really difficult. If I make a quick turn on it, it'll suddenly jump from macro to infinity. Turn it slowly, it's gradually going to work its way. It's very inconsistent and it's tough to focus during a shot, and the Samsung lenses are still focus-by-wire lenses. Now usually that's not too much of a problem. On the GH4 or the Sony a7S, I'm adapting lenses, Canons, Nikons, Leicas, old manual glass. But the Samsung has never been a terribly popular lens mount, so what I'm finding is there's not a lot of adapter options. I tried a Pentax one earlier. Pentax, you have to focus backwards, kind of drives me crazy. No Canon mount adapters, Nikon mount adapters aren't giving you an aperture ring, so I can't control exposure with G-series lenses. That's the biggest issue with this camera. If it's a popular model, then hopefully those lens options are going to start to expand, but for the time being, it's focus by wire or basically nothing. Okay guys, so I'm being filmed on the NX1 right now, just so we can look at a couple things. First thing I want to talk about is rolling shutter. Now you can see as we pan around here, fairly well controlled. I'd say it's on par with about like a Panasonic GH4. It's certainly better than a Sony a7S. And that's pretty impressive considering, it's got a bigger Super 35 sensor. Other thing I want to talk about, the audio inputs on it are quite good. It has decent preamps. So running any external mics through there, you shouldn't have many issues. You shouldn't have to worry about it too much like a Canon or a Nikon DSLR. Also, we're shooting in continuous face detect autofocus right now. It's doing a fairly good job. I can get a little bit closer. I can get a little bit further away, and it's going to respond nice and smoothly. So I'm fairly impressed. One thing I did notice, the autofocus isn't as good in video as it is in stills. I think that comes down to processing power again, because that was the same case with Panasonic's GH4.
Jordan and I are back in the store now. We're going to take a look at the photos. I'm going to do stills first. We're going to take a look at the high ISO performance. Then it'll be over to Jordan to take a look at the video workflow. So let's check it out. Time to take a look at high ISO performance on the Samsung NX1, starting at 800 ISO and moving up from there. Now, as we get higher and higher, Jordan and I noticed a very impressive characteristic. Excellent contrast and detail are still maintained with the NX1. Even at high ISOs, you're still getting very good sharpness. Pattern noise is definitely better than anything we've seen so far. It surpasses cameras like the Nikon D3300, for example, which are already very good at high ISO performance. We're also finding with the Samsung NX1 a tendency to get an interesting pattern noise. I kind of describe it as a wormy pattern. It's a strange texture, but it should look fairly organic. Now, I got another thing here for you. I want you to take a look at a file compared from the NX1 and the Pentax K3, which at the time really blew us away as well. Taking a look here, you can see that pattern noise is at least a stop and a half better. And even with the noise being better, it definitely holds on to a lot more sharpness on the NX1 file. You can see the K3 file is going fairly soft. So overall, this NX1, incredible low light performance. I would almost compare it to some other current full frame cameras.
Okay, so the NX1 has a brand new format, H.265 compression, and that's great because the file size is very low, but it does mean it's an absolute nightmare in editing to work with those files right now. The good thing is I got my NX1 after a few other people, so someone like Andrew Reed from EOS HD told me the workaround working with these files. You want to expand them up to a ProRes file. We've been using a program called Wondershare. It's pretty reasonable, and what that's going to let you do is bring them up to nice, full ProRes, easily editable files, and it's a huge difference in file size. Those files will come out to be about 10 times the original size, just so you can edit them. Got to be aware of that going into it. You're going to have very small files on your camera, but huge files on your computer. Good news is hard drive space is a lot cheaper than memory cards. So now that we're done the transcoding process, we can actually look at the video files, which usually isn't that much of a hassle. But looking at it, I'm actually really impressed. There is a ton of detail in these images, and I actually kind of like the color and contrast coming out of it. Now, there's no real flat profile, so it means there's not that much room to play, but I'm quite happy with this coming out for like documentary work, things like that. It doesn't have a very filmic look. I'd still say that the GH4 or one of the Sony's shooting S-Log gives you much more of that classic motion picture look. I'm really hoping that we see some film convert profiles for the NX1 soon. That'll kind of help to give it maybe a little bit more personality. So let's talk about the high ISO performance on the NX1, and it's almost what we expected. It's quite a bit better than the GH4, not as good as the A7S, which we'd expect given the respective sensor sizes. But there is something really interesting I found. We really don't see much of a difference in the noise from 100 ISO to 1600. It is very clean at 1600 ISO, but then suddenly we see a big jump in the noise at 3200, even more at 6400. I really think it's the way that it's downsampling the sensor. We do see this big jump right there. I think below 1600 it's sampling the entire sensor, and then maybe it's doing some sort of line skipping, pixel binning, or the processor just can't keep up with the noise at 3200 and 6400. You'll really notice that, but you could be very comfortable shooting consistently at 1600. It looks very good. I'd put it in line with something like a Sony FS700 for noise performance. It's quite a performer.
All right, guys, so we're back here now, Jordan and I, to talk about our final thoughts on the Samsung NX1. What do you think?
I mean, it's cool because we haven't seen this much new technology all in one camera for quite some time. And spec-wise, I mean, there's nothing really competing with it in this price range.
Yeah, on paper, this camera delivers. And actually what I liked is the technology, for the most part, was not gimmicky. It was really working fantastic. Other than, of course, that silly baseball shot mode.
Right.
But the other thing is it's not just about technology. The camera also handles well in the real world. I loved using this camera.
Yeah, all the other Samsungs always felt a little plasticky to me.
Yeah.
This really reminds me of like a small Leica S2 is really what it feels like in the hand, which is pretty amazing.
It's handsome, it's rugged, it's very functional, easy to change. So I enjoyed using it, and so did you in still mode.
Yeah, I went and took some stills with it in low light, and I really enjoyed using the camera with one exception, which is how inconsistent that autofocus is when the lights get a little low.
Yeah, the autofocus is not great. There are times when it hunts, and that was unfortunate. But let's talk about the crowning glory of this camera.
Yeah.
Probably the best APS-C size sensor on the market today.
For image quality, it's unbelievable. It competes, I would say, with some full-frame cameras that are on the market
very
right
sharp,
now.
great low light. But what about video, Jordan? I mean, that's what everybody's caring about on this camera. What did you think about video?
I was really curious about the H.265 codec, and it is an absolute pain, you know, to have to transcode all that stuff before you edit it. but the image is really, really good. I would say it's probably my favorite image in this price range, especially if you're doing a bit more low light shooting. It is quite a bit nicer than the GH4. What let me down is the handling for shooting. You know, having to go into that pre-record to actually see my frame, and then I start losing my focus aids. It seems kind of nonsensical. The good news is it's entirely firmware.
I mean, you gotta remember too, this is their first stab at it, right? Samsung is really coming into the market here. So funny, great handle on stills, not so good on video. Would you use this as a video camera?
I don't know. I really, when I was shooting with this and then I'd go back to the GH4 to film you, the GH4 was much easier to use. I was much more comfortable. I could work faster with it. This I felt I had to fight with a bit more. Now that might be because it's a new camera, but I still can't see this being my go-to camera in that.
Well, guys, it looks like we have a great camera, and hopefully it will get even greater. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys soon.
Yeah, subscribe and follow us on Twitter.